Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast with me, the comedy nerd Marty Kano. You know, I go to see a lot of live comedy, almost every day in fact, so I get to meet some of the comedians on the circuit, and it's always a source of great pleasure that some of them were happy to come and talk to me on the podcast IRL, which as we all know stands for I'm Really Lonely. You can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. If you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a misanthropic comic with a rare talent for dark humour. She uses themes of depression, body dysmorphia, and suicide to creatively hilarious effect, making her runner-up at the 2023 Funny Women Awards and securing a nomination for Best Debut Show at this year's Leicester Comedy Awards, with a work in progress of a forthcoming debut Edinburgh show. It's stand-up comedian Hannah Platt. So why don't you tell me how it all started? Was comedy a thing in the household growing up?
No, I don't think so. I think that the first time I saw any comedy was on Live at the Apollo, when Michael McIntyre was first started doing that as a road show. And I remember really loving it and thinking it was amazing. I remember Rich Hall being the first person that I was like, oh, he's cool, I want to do that.
Yeah.
But I guess that when I first really got into it was off the back of that. I started watching loads of different stand-up and researching everyone online like a creep, and found Robin Ince and Josie Long, and they were my idols that I listened to their Utter Shambles podcast, and I would listen to that all the time, and it made me feel like I had this little insight into this little weird world where everyone was a bit more like me, and I felt a lot less like I was a freak. It was they were talking about stuff and everyone was learning from each other and having constructive conversations that were funny and interesting and intelligent, and I was like, oh my god, I wanna be those people.
Yeah. So was that a direct inspiration that made you want to do stand-up yourself?
Yeah, I think especially that little group. Yeah, I liked that there was that little kind of community and that they all knew each other, and I found that very appealing, and also that there was lots of different everyone was their own personality and they all had their own strong outlooks, and they were all individuals.
Yeah.
I really liked that everyone was like a character.
Yeah. So was comedy an influence then as time passed and you were studying, and what did you hope to be? Was there always comedy in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I always really wanted to do it, but I think I wanted to be a writer more. I think because I was too terrified to do stand-up, basically, that I was so worried about it that it's terrifying. The idea of it freaked me out because I didn't want to stand on stage and have no one laugh and there be nothing to, cover that up. It's very obvious if you're failing at stand-up because everyone in the room can tell, So I think that putting yourself out there, that really terrified me. So I didn't do it for the longest time, even though I wanted to. I always wanted to do it since I was a teenager, but I was just that's too scary.
So what was your first live stand-up performance then?
So I did it at an open mic that my friend ran. So I was having a really bad time. That's a running theme throughout. Me doing stand-up is me also having a bad time in my personal life. I was having a really bad time and I was staying on my friend's couch and she ran a comedy open mic, and I'd always wanted to do it, but I was too scared. But part of me was I am so depressed right now that if I do it, it will not change anything. I feel so bad about myself that I can't feel any worse. So I was I'll do it. And I think my friend just got a lot of my friends together to be look, Hannah's gonna off herself if you don't laugh at this. So I had a really good time doing it. And then I think that delusion has carried over constantly.
And was it was it kind of what you expected?
Um, no, I think that like when you don't do stand up, like whenever I talk to like people in audiences or whatever like that, or people who want to do it but haven't started yet,
Mm.
the fear is that everyone is like not on your side. Like the fear is that like the audience are going to be like, well, go on then. Like we hate this. We've paid money or like we've taken time out to see this, but we have no involvement or interest in you being good whatsoever, right? But that's not the case ever. Like there's probably some gigs where people, you know, like in club gigs, there will be some people who think that they're funnier than you. So they will be a bit more guarded. But that's so rare, even at those gigs. Like people are there, like, you know, they've paid money and they want to have a good time. They don't want you to be shit.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a big part of it. And like, you know, people are terrified of being heckled. People are terrified of all of that.
Yeah.
And I think as well now, because like those videos are the ones that like go viral on TikTok and stuff like that, that people are really like, that's all they've seen of stand up.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh my God, like it's just you on stage and you're without a net and you're just on your own and people are yelling stuff at you and you've just got to come up. Like it doesn't happen. Like
One too many comedian destroys heckler reels, that sort of
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah. I always do a joke about it that like I think people are always worried. Like even like doing like an hour show, like I've started doing hour shows now in the run up to the Fringe, and it's so funny that people still will not sit at the front. And it's like that is not the situation where I'm gonna chat to you ever. Like it's never gonna be comedian destroys heckler. It's gonna be heckler destroys comedian self-esteem. That is the way around it will be.
Do you have like anxiety going onto the stage still?
No,
No.
no. I think that like the only gigs where I get a bit nervous will be if it's like a gig where everything is set up and it's amazing, and the only way that I can do bad is on me. That's the only times where I get a little bit, because it's fun if there's other elements. If like you go to a gig and like it's clearly not set up for comedy, or there's, you know, you've watched the other acts and the audience are really rowdy or like they're drunk or whatever,
Mm.
or there's a big stag doing or something like that. Those are like fun obstacles that you can play with.
Mm.
Whereas, like, when everything is set up for you to do the absolute best that you can, and you're on a bill with people you respect, and everyone is doing amazing,
Yeah.
there's nothing stopping you from smashing it. So that is the time where I'm like, well, I better do well at this now. There's no like new elements. This is a very respectful, comedy savvy audience.
Mm.
And if I go on stage and I'm like, what about this? And they go, nah, you're all right, actually.
Tell me about your own particular brand of comedy, your style. Were you mindful all the time that you wanted to go out and hold up this dark lens, shall we say?
I think so. I think as well, when I started, it was like way, way more deadpan. Like I wouldn't move. And like, and part of that was definitely because I was so nervous. So it's kind of like a shield, you know?
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm really dark and I'm really deadpan because I don't care what you guys think. And it's like, well, actually, people who do that care the most. They don't want to let people in. So I feel a lot more like confident and comfortable now that like it doesn't have to be that rigid. But I think it's just naturally what my sense of humor is like, that it's always been kind of like dark. And I hate say like I always hate when like describing my comedy as dark, because normally that just means like saying the word rape and no, there's nothing. You know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
normally feels like it's like edgelordy, like,
Yeah.
or it's just like, you know, going, oh, Princess Diana, and you're like, it's not, it's not anything.
Sort of weary
But I
then.
think it's more, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that like I enjoy the juxtaposition of being like a tiny little girl and talking about that has always been like a really easy shorthand for audiences to like be like, okay, we understand who this is, and then I can move on and do what I want rather than having to really set up my stall
Mm.
and introduce like this is who I am, you know. It's
Yeah.
like quite a it's like a, you know, it's like a little cartoon version of who I am, and then I can move on and be like an actual person.
But I feel like when I'm watching you perform, I feel like you like it if the audience is off balance, if they're uncomfortable with this weary, disaffected tone. Am I wrong that you like to keep the audience sort of on edge, on the back foot?
I think it's more that like I think no one really enjoys stuff when they know what's coming. Or like if they know where it's going. You know, if you're watching a film and you're like, I can guess what this twist is, or I can guess where this is going, it's less enjoyable. Whereas if you're kind of always a little bit like surprised, or there's something, or like, you know, there's always like a bit of a shift in tone or something like that, or you're caught off guard. I just think that makes everything a little bit more engaging. And like, I don't want to watch comedy and guess what the punchline is. Or if I can guess what the punchline is, I want to be proven so wrong, or I want it to be like taken out from under me that I guessed right and then I was wrong later on, or something like that, you know. I think that's more interesting than being like, and then I got off the bus, you know.
You said about being a version of yourself. How much of yourself do you let out on stage? How much is the truth and how much is embellished for that stage character?
I think quite a lot of it. I try and be like, you know, like people aren't stupid. I think that when you're like, if you're presenting something, it's clear that's clearly not real. People can tell a mile off, even if they're not like looking out for it. They can always tell if something's false. So I do like to be. I think I'm quite similar to what I'm like on stage. It's just a tiny bit heightened for stage, because I'm quite like a quiet person. You can't be quiet on stage, otherwise there's nothing there. So, you know, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more heightened. And things are I'll embellish stories, but just for you know, it's for comedic effect. There's never like you know, it's not suddenly in my private life that I'm suddenly like insanely happy and joyous, and I've never been to see a counselor and my dad's still alive and like all of this, you know, like, all of it is based in truth, or it's based in things that at the time I've perceived to be true.
So when you talk about things like suicide and self-loathing, and you mentioned like therapy there, do people come up after your show? Genuinely, I'm curious about this. I nearly said furious.
Freudian slip.
There's my inner misogyny coming out, getting angry and protective.
Thank you for being annoyed on my behalf.
Do people genuinely come up and say, you know, are you all right?
Some people don't come up and ask if I'm all right, which
that's
is
more worrying, isn't it? I don't know.
Do that. No, I'm joking. No, people will come up and will want to tell me about their experiences. And like sometimes that is like, I like that they agree, as in like I've said something that matches their experience and they've related to it. Some people get very intense, and I'm not a trained professional, so I don't know. I don't know what to say. One guy once read me a poem about how he tried to kill himself last year, and it was I hope he's okay, but he did it at the worst time. So I was having a chat with my friend, and she was telling a story about how she'd shot herself the previous night. So I was laughing at the story, and someone taps me on the shoulder, and I'm like still laughing at the story, and I turn around and this guy goes, I tried to kill myself last year and I've written a poem about it. And I'm still like laughing, and I've got to like recalibrate to be like, oh God, no, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, it's like, I've written a poem about it. And my friend comes and is like, you know, what are we chatting about? And then it's like, there's the two of us. And he's like, I've written a poem and I'm going to read it to you now. Not can I read it to you? I'm going to read it to you now. And in that moment, I look down, because I'm like, you know, as if I'm like really listening to the poem. And that is one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, right? Because when he was reading it, he wasn't reading it off a paper. He was reciting it and looking at me. So me looking down, I then decided that was where I was looking, and that was a lot better than me being like, well, this guy did that, you know? And my friend immediately realized that she wasn't necessary to the conversation. She just walked away. So I was just now listening to this poem. You know what? The poem was bad as well. It didn't rhyme.
The only sign of a good poem is right.
Rhyme. Or make it a haiku so it's short. But yeah, sometimes people will talk to me about it, but like it can be, sometimes it can be a bit intense, and I'm like, oh, it's comedy, and I wish that I had more of a thing to say to you rather than, oh, sorry, because I feel useless then. Some people will try and tell me a new diagnosis. Don't do that. Like, I don't want that. Like, you'll be like, oh, I'm watching you, and I reckon maybe you've got ADHD. And I'm like, that's rude. Because also there is a big thing with that as well, that sometimes I think that because it's always people who have got like a new diagnosis of these things as well.
Right.
So like they'll just have found out that they have this.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, a lot of what you said I related to, so I think you've got it as well. And I'm like, no, I'm just really good at writing. I've just written a relatable set and you've got it and you've gone, oh, well, I have BPD. I've just found out. So maybe she does as well. No.
Yeah. There's a thing where I can't remember the phrase. I'm trying to remember what it is, but where you have if you suddenly something is relevant to you specifically, you see it everywhere.
Right.
Like
Okay.
if you buy a new car, go out and buy a Volkswagen Beetle, suddenly you see Volkswagen Beetles everywhere you go. It's just that it's that sudden familiarity. So it's like you say, they get a diagnosis, they see it everywhere.
It's like something biased.
Yeah.
I've heard of that before. It's the same with like when you see 11:11, like the time 11:11 all the time, and you're like, I see it all the time, and it's like, no, you've probably seen 11:48 as much as well. But
yeah.
it just doesn't stick out in your head as much.
Yeah. I've read some very positive things about your act from like Chortle and Brewster Sauer and these people. How do you feel about feedback and criticism, whether it be in the press or in the room?
It's interesting because like I haven't done an hour show yet. That's what I'm like building up to do this year.
Yeah.
So I've never had like a full review that's just of me. And I think I will handle that very badly. So I'm gonna not read any of them. I'm gonna get someone else to read them and give me like a general gist, because I will find something in that, even if it's like a 5-star, this is amazing, she's gonna be absolutely insanely huge, this is brilliant. There will be one line where I'll be like, no, I didn't like my hair or something, you know what I mean? I'll find it. With like the reviews I've had, they've always been through when I've been in like the finals of competitions. So it's always like, you know, you only get like 3 lines or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's also of your best like 10 minutes or whatever. Competitions are always like, you know, you're putting out kind of your best, but also it being like, this is exactly what I'm like summed up in. This is what the act is summed up in this short amount of time.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more like, what do you think of this act in general, rather than what do you think of this created show? So it feels a little bit different, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of competition specifically, so BBC New Comedian of the Year finalist in 2019 and a bunch of other that year. You also did Circuit Breakers at Leicester. Competitions like the second place in Funny Women last year. And then this year, of course, you're nominated at Leicester Comedy Festival for Best Debut Show, which is the Edinburgh Hour you're working on. Given what you just said about competitions, how do you feel about them in general and your place in them?
I think that like I did, so it's very annoying looking back, because I was basically like, I'm gonna do comedy and get as good as I can in the North. And then my idea was to enter all of these competitions that are like kind of national competitions, and it'd be like, wow, where did she come from? Like that's so like that's oh cool, you know. And I got to the final of all the ones that I entered, and it was like, job well done, that's exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
But then COVID happened. So it was like the year that I was like, you know, it's very like it's like sod's law, but it's also like, oh, if I'd have gotten what I wanted, maybe I'd be a nightmare. So but so that was the idea behind it, that it was like, I think they're good as like an introduction to like the industry, when like I, you know, lived in Manchester and like would gig in London every now and then, but at very like small gigs, and I didn't really like, you know, it's it's hard to get a foot on the ladder, and I didn't know how to do that. So that was my way of being like, oh, well, this will get some kind of attention, or it'll get some kind of reviews and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was like my idea of it. I never thought I'd win. It was just more like I wanted to be in the room, you know?
Yeah. And of course, lockdown there, you mentioned, how was it for you? What did you do in lockdown, and how did you come out of it? What was your changed perspective, if there was such a thing?
I had the worst time. It was so bad. Well, the first year was so bad. Like I felt really irritated because I'd worked really hard that year, and then things were starting to like progress, and it felt like I was suddenly getting like an end of what, you know, of the trajectory that I was working on.
Yes.
And then everything absolutely shut down. And so that first year, and especially it was just very difficult not knowing like when it was going to end. You know, it was always just kind of like a 6 months. Oh, it'll just be like, you know, it'll be for like 6 months or whatever. And it ended up being like 2 years. So that made me feel insane. And I already feel insane. And I was like, I was living on my own as well. So it was very like, you know that book, The Yellow Wallpaper? Like that's what I felt like. I felt like a woman that had been like cast into an attic and was seeing shapes in the walls. That's what it felt like. And I just kind of, I was just terrified the whole time that like the industry would come back and I wouldn't be part of it.
Right.
Because I was so new, and I'd only just started to do anything. And then it was like, oh, well, we're not going to be like, wait, where did that new girl go? We're going to be interested in like the people that were already established.
Yeah.
So I was very worried about that. But then when we went into our second year, I was like, right, okay, like this could be forever. This could just be how it is now, and I've got to learn to adapt. So I then started like being a lot more productive and doing stuff, because I was like, well, this could go on and on. In that time, I did like a thing for BBC Three, where I wrote and filmed a sketch for BBC Three that was part of like their laugh lessons thing, and that was so fun because it was like, because we still did it during lockdown, so it was like I hadn't seen people. I think we had like a social bubble, but I hadn't seen anyone like from comedy or anything like that. And then it was suddenly like I got to cast it as well. Yeah. And then suddenly it was like, oh my God, little comedy friends. We're in the same room. This is so fun. So like just being able to like work on stuff while that was happening and feeling like there was other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it being, that made me feel a lot more like this isn't the end,
So yes, that lockdown project then, Laugh Lessons, that's still available to watch on iPlayer. Your film support group. When you put pen to paper, did you know what it was going to be at the end? Did you have a point that you wanted specifically to make, or did that come from putting pen to paper?
Yeah, well, I pitched 3 sketches, and the support group one was the one that I hadn't written yet. And they obviously picked that one. I was like, oh shit, I gotta write it now, because the other 2 were like really fleshed out ideas that I already had.
Right.
And then that one was just like, oh, I just need a third idea. I'll write something about like, being like not like other girls. And I think like a support group thing is like a funny, it's like a funny device.
Yeah.
And also I've been in like a lot of group therapy and stuff like that. So it felt really weird to like film it in like, again, like a little like town hall thing. And it was like, oh, this is where they have them as well. But yeah, I knew that like, I knew like the kind of idea that I wanted it to be. And also like when I was writing it, there was like, I sent it to some people to be like, am I getting the point across? And some of them were like, oh yeah, it's like funny because it's like, oh yeah, like stupid bitches. And I was like, no, that's not, absolutely not. So I had to like rewrite it, because I was like, I'm not making fun of women. That's the whole point. I'm making fun of people of women who think that they're not in the group,
Yeah.
women who think that like, oh, well, that's what women do. I'm not actually like that. So you can't be sexist and laugh at me because I'm different. I have decided that I've taken myself out of that. I'm written by a man. So
Yeah. All this time that you spent writing then over lockdown and having wanted to be a writer, do you find yourself more comfortable as a writer or as a performer?
I think that like because I remember listening to a comedian podcast, and I think Sarah Millican was like, "Oh, every comedian either starts off as a writer and they've got to learn to be a performer, or a performer and they've got to learn to be a writer." So I was definitely that way around. I was a writer and I had to learn how to be a performer.
Yeah.
Because initially, when I first started, my whole idea was, oh, I'll get like a girl who wants to be an actor, and I'll write her stand up and she can act it out. But you've got no accountability when you do that. Like if I was writing stand up for someone else in that kind of guise, I think it would be like it wouldn't be as good because you've got to have that accountability of being like, oh, it is me. So I've got to stand by this and be like, this is me saying this. I think this is a good idea.
Yeah.
And then you're putting yourself out there being like, I'm going to stand by this and I think it's good. Whereas if you're just going, I reckon maybe this, maybe something about that. And it's like, if you can't stand by it, it's good for editing because you've got to be the one to say it. I think that the more that I do stand up as myself, the more that like I really enjoy writing for myself. So it's like I really like writing in my own voice. And I think that like there's definitely bits of stand-up that I've written or like things that I've written where I've been like, nah, I wouldn't say that. Like that's funny, but I wouldn't. That's probably for someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel that same way? Because obviously you've written for like the News Quiz and Now Show and other like radio. Do you feel that same way? It's like if you write something, well, that's not my voice, but someone else can say it.
Yeah, I think that like it's been interesting because I always used to find that really much more easy. And now the more that I do stand up, the easier I find it to write in my voice, but writing for other people, I have to be like, I'll write all of it and then I'll be like, oh no, that's Hugh Dennis would never talk about feminism in that way. Like, why would I put that in? So I think it's just more, I've got to be conscious of that because, now I'll naturally write in a voice that is just for me.
Yeah.
And then I've got to be like, well, would actually a host say that? Because a host has got to be very neutral. And, they can't have they can have a point of view, but it has to be, it's not you're not playing a character if you're hosting a show. You're letting everyone else do that.
Yeah. Do you still watch comedy and are you able to watch it as an audience member or do you watch it as a comedian?
I think that like I still love watching comedy. I still enjoy watching comedy. I do think I do that classic comedian thing that everyone does, or maybe it's also for people who have watched a lot of comedy as well, where you'll watch something and someone will say a joke and you go, that's good. Rather than laughing, you'll just be like, I appreciate the form and the callback or the reveal of that joke.
Yeah.
Rather than being like, ha 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 ha, which is a normal human response. Instead of doing that, you just go, that's good. I'll nudge the person next to me and go, that was very good.
Yeah, I had to retrain myself to laugh. I watch so much comedy that every now and then I'd sort of go, oh, I haven't laughed for like 15 minutes. I should probably say something. Because I'm just sitting there going,
Yeah.
Genuinely, I'm having a brilliant time. It's just,
I am enjoying it.
It's all internal.
Yeah. I think but I don't know if it's happening because of like more people are learning about stand-up through like online stuff. When you're on your own, like you might laugh at like the odd thing that really gets you out loud when you're on your own, but most of the time it's just like a heavy exhale out your nose. So like I did a gig on Saturday with someone who's like really big on TikTok, and so most of the audience were there for them. And I was like, oh, these aren't like big laughers. Like they're loving it. They're really into everybody, but they're not big. And I was like, are they doing the exhale out the nose a lot tonight? Is that what that is?
And if you're watching other comedians, are there people who now still inspire you the way that those original comics did?
I think that there's definitely some people where I love anyone who has like their own voice and they're really an individual. Like Christopher MacArthur Boyd, I always cite him as someone who's like his writing is so for him, and it's really like he has like a CMBism, like the way he speaks. It's like it's a bit like John Cooper Clarke. Like I really like it, but it's very precise and it's really to him. And I feel like if someone else did that, I'd be like, oh, you're copying him. You're copying Chris.
Right.
And I really his show last year at the Fringe. I was like, that's brilliant. That every line I went, that's good. That.
What has your Fringe experience been as a whole then so far? I mean, we know, and we talked about you're taking your hour to the Fringe this year, but you're no stranger to the Fringe. So what is your Fringe experience like?
Yeah, so I've been going every year since I was 18, but like most of that like was as a punter. I was like the people that like I love and who I love coming to my shows are the people that have a spreadsheet. And
Guilty.
I think you're fucking nerds, but I did that. I was very embarrassing. I had a little spreadsheet of all the shows I wanted to see, and all the times that I had free where I could take a punt. So like I really loved comedy and I loved being at the Fringe. And then after that, I was in cabaret shows because I was absolutely terrified of no one laughing at my jokes, but I wasn't terrified about like doing burlesque in front of strangers. That was completely different, because I think what I've realized recently is no one, like when you, like I was saying before, like when you're laughing, like when you're in a room watching comedy and no one is laughing, everyone in the room can tell that this is bad comedy. It's like instinctive. If I'm not laughing, it's not good, right? And you can tell if anyone else is enjoying it because if they're laughing or not. Whereas with burlesque, no one knows if burlesque is good or not. So they're just like, that's probably great. There's no like known response. Like you're meant to cheer. Like I love watching burlesque. I think it's great. It wasn't for me. I was bad at it. But no one knows. No one knows if it's bad or not. You might think that like it's awkward to watch, but like you're sat there being like, "Am I the only one?" Because you can't tell. There's no initial response. So I did that for a bit, and I went up for a few years doing that. And then at the Fringe, I went up. I did Best in Class for a week, and that was the year that was in 2019. Oh, I did in 2018, sorry, I did Big Value with Just a Tonic, and that was for the full month. And I did not have 20 minutes when I went up, but I was booked to do 20 minutes every day. And I definitely had 20 minutes when I came out the other end of it, so that was good. And then the year after that I did Best in Class, and that was also the year that I was doing the BBC final, so that kind of coincided. That was like a really fun year. And then after that, when my favorite year was the year that the Fringe came back kind of like in a smaller capacity,
right?
Because like I went up for a week and I did a show at Monkey Barrel with Erica Eela, and we sold out every day because there was only like everyone sold out every day that year. It was amazing. We were all very famous that year. I mean, it was at reduced capacity, but no one tells it. No one says that, so it's fine. That was really fun. And then the year after that, I did a split with Jodie Mitchell for the whole month, just on the free Fringe, and we just did half an hour each. And then last year I just did a week of a whip, doing like 45 minutes just to see if it was anything. And I had a really good time. I was on at a weird time. I was on at 12:30 in the afternoon, and I was like, oh, this will be awful. But actually, like, I loved being everyone's first show. That was so fun. Because it was just like, because like people probably didn't know what they were coming to, or if they had an idea of it, they maybe had seen like 5 minutes or something. So then being like, this is your first show of the day, it's gonna be hard work. I want to ruin you for all of the shows for the day. I want you to be sad all day.
But how did that make you feel then? Because you can do your show, and then for the rest of the day, your time is your own.
Yeah, it was really good. I think it's really it puts discipline in you as well to do like a whip for that week where you've got to be up at a certain time and stuff like that, which is so ridiculous. You're up for 12:30, like lunchtime in normal times, but in fringe times that's like early morning, So like it does like put a bit of discipline in you that you do have to get up and you have to be like you've got to be on a bit of more of a normal schedule rather than being like, oh, my show's at 9:30. I can, do whatever. Especially because the year before, my show with Jodie, every night was on at like 11:30, I think, at night. So that was like, and also I don't drink before I've performed. So that was like, I was always like, well, I would like a drink after my show that is finished at 12:30. And then that is a slippery slope. Whereas, 12:30 was a lot better just to be like, oh, you're like doing a normal routine. Like,
yeah. So what about your show that you're taking up this year then? What's that all about?
So it's called Defense Mechanism, and whenever I say it, I have to do that voice because I think it might be a little bit of a wanky title, but that's the whole point of the show is that like, I find it hard to be like in general, I find it quite hard to be vulnerable and like put myself out there and stuff like that. But the whole thing with good comedy is that you are putting yourself out there and you are being vulnerable. And I want to do that, but I'm learning to do that. But also it's funny that like when I first started, the kind of shows that I was doing were like, quite like rowdy rooms. And it'd be like, well, they don't want to hear about that. So it'd be like I'd go on stage and like I've always been the type of person that'll be like, I'll say all my faults right up top so you can't take the piss out of me, right? So I've got control out of that. So doing comedy like rewarded that, you know what I mean? It like rewarded that idea of being like, I'm gonna go on stage and I'm gonna say Scouse ginger woman before you can like yell it at me or whatever. I'll take the piss out of myself and then you can't do it. But like I'm not doing those gigs now, you know what I mean? So it's a little bit different and I'm performing to audiences that like I like. So it's like I want to entertain those people and I want those people to come back. So it's like it's hard to be like, putting yourself out there and being like, look, this is who I am, this is what it is. Do you like it? I'm offering it to you. And because if they go no, then I'm like, well, what's this for? Like,
Yeah.
So that's the whole show is about me trying to open up, but also because I want to be good at this and I want the show to be good and I want to show myself to the audiences that I want, but also at the same time I don't wanna.
But that's the difference, I suppose, with a solo show. You talked about doing the spots or doing a split bill. This time, the audience are all there for you, specifically for you. So that must be a world of difference.
Yeah, and I can always at those other shows I can be like, they're all there for such and such.
Yeah.
They all want to do that. It doesn't. I can do whatever. It doesn't matter. No one's there for me. Yeah. Whereas now I'll just assume that they couldn't get into someone else's show, so they've come to see mine.
Do you have sort of objectives? Do you set yourself targets, either fringe-wise or just career-wise? Like, in 5 years, I want to have played on this bill with this person, or I want to have performed at this venue, or at Fringe, I want to go in and I want to get a 4-star review, a 5-star review. I want so-and-so to publish something positive about the show. Do you have those kinds of objectives?
Not really. I think that all the objectives that I have are more like internal and then more about like what I want to put out there. I think because, going to therapy, The whole thing is that like you can't control anyone else. You can't control anyone else's response to it. You can't control how other people react to what you're doing. You can only control what you put out and what you do. So all
Yeah.
I want is to do the best show that I can, that I know I can. I
Hmm.
want to have no, and this is why, like, this year for my first show, I've tried to go like all out with it, like get a good venue, do everything to be as like visible as possible.
Mm.
So I'm not putting anything in my way that I can then do a show that I'm really proud of.
Mm.
And then I'll never know, like I'll never be wondering down the line if it was because, oh, because I didn't do it in this room or at this time, or like,
Yeah.
oh, because I didn't do all of this. Like I'll know, and it'll be like I've put out what I want to put out. And if everyone goes, this is the worst thing we've ever seen, I'll go, well, I did what I wanted to do,
Mm.
and if no one likes it, then I've got an answer, rather than it being like, I did this for everybody else and no one else liked it, and now I'm just stuck doing a show every day about, I don't know, plant pots. And because I thought plant pots were going to be the big thing everyone was talking about this year, And then everyone goes and they're like, "What's that about plant pots? We don't like plant pots anymore. We're on hanging baskets or whatever."
Obviously, you've mentioned that you're Liverpudlian and you're based in Manchester. So, do you find, as you do Edinburgh, as you do spots in London or wherever, do you find
Mhm.
regional sort of cultural differences affect the way your comedy is received or the way you perform your comedy?
I'm not sure. I think that like in the north, I don't have an accent, whereas elsewhere I have an accent. That's like the main difference, that
Mm.
it's like, um, but obviously like the it depends on the gig where if they give a shit about that or not, obviously. But it's in my script to always be, not my script as in my comedy script, I mean in my life script, to always be like, I've got to explain my presence. So I've always got to mention it, even if people go, we don't care, talk about how you're sad, right? Um, but yeah, I don't know if I noticed like a massive cultural difference really. I think it's more based on like the type of audience. You get different types of audiences everywhere. You can do a gig in Manchester and it will be to like a rowdy room full of like stag and hen do's, and then it will be literally across the road there will be like a lovely, everyone's wearing an anorak and is, a big fan of Daniel Kitson and that kind of thing. So it just kind of, it depends on like I feel like it's kind of like that everywhere, that it depends on the vibe of the place and
Mhm.
how they've presented themselves, rather than it being like, oh well, in Stoke-on-Trent they only like jokes about whatever. I nearly said plant pots again. Why am I thinking about that? Okay.
Well,
That's what the show's about now. It's just about
I'm,
plant pots.
I'm looking forward to your tight plant pot material. That's going to be,
I know, yeah. The second show, you know
yeah.
what that's going to be about.
I'm guessing you don't have a garden at your flat.
No, 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 no. Right. So there is a garden. This is the saddest thing, right? I do have a garden, but it's
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 dead.
all concreted
Yeah,
over. It's
yeah.
just slabs. So there's no grass or anything like that. It's just a space where there is concrete slabs. Because
Yeah.
I only found this out like during lockdown. I'd not been here for that long. And then when things started to open up again, I was like, oh, I can have people like in my garden. And I was like, I have a garden. Then we went in there and it's like, that's not a garden. It's just a pavement, but a private pavement.
I feel the metaphor coming. So, what are the most important lessons then so far that you think you've learned? What philosophy drives your next performance?
I think a lot of it, like I said before, is just like caring about what you can control, like
Yeah.
caring about what you're doing,
Mm.
rather than like people's responses to it. Like if you're doing what you want to do and you're saying what you want to say, you'll
Yeah.
always feel like, you know, it'll always feel important to you, rather than chasing like, uh, you know, being on this show or getting a review by this person or whatever. Like, you can't control that, and you have no idea what other people want either. Whereas if you're always just doing what you want, I think that like the people that I really look up to have always been the people that have stood their ground in like their persona, and like it might have developed as they've developed as an act, but it's always like really true to them. And then suddenly they've blown up because there's suddenly been a spotlight on them, and everyone's like, where have they been forever? And it's like they've been getting really good is what they've been doing. Like, and then it happens for them at the time where they're at their peak, and then they've got all of this back catalogue to be like, look how great I am. Like, that's what I enjoy. And also I think like I would carry on doing comedy if people were not interested in it. Like, I think that like maybe I wouldn't be like putting myself out there as much, you know. I probably wouldn't be like trying to make money from it or trying to make a career out of it, but I really enjoy it. And I think that like that's always a thing, especially like I've always had that in therapy where like I've always fretted about it because I care about it so much. And a common theme has always been like, would you do it if no one was paying attention to it? Would you still do it? Would you still enjoy it? Would you still want to do it? And my answer is always yes. So it's like, okay, well, like put that in a box. You're not gonna like quit. There might just be this thing where you go, oh, I'll pull back a bit, you know. Oh, I won't be putting myself out. I won't be doing all of this. I'll just do, you know, open mics or whatever, because it's something that I enjoy. I enjoy writing it, and I enjoy performing in the voice that I've written. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's like, yeah, if you want to do it, and you would do it if no one was like liking it online or was raving about it or whatever. Yeah. I think that's important. Yeah.
You've obviously brought up therapy a few times, and it's an easy throwaway gag for a stand-up to talk about, oh, this is my therapy. Do you find it therapeutic at all in that sense?
I guess that like I think it does kind of like boil down what you think about things. Because you know, like you have ideas of what to talk about, but then you've got to make them as succinct as possible to like get the idea across, rather than just kind of like flights of fancy or whatever. Yeah. So I think it does make everything a bit more precise. So sometimes you'll think about it in that way, and you'll be like, oh, this is like, when it boils down to it, this is what I think about this situation or whatever. Yeah. So I think that that's helpful. And also I always just found it really helpful that when I was in quite dark places and there's things that I'll talk about, you know, you always think, you know, when you're in that position, you're like, no one has ever felt like this before. I am having the worst time, and it is absolutely just me because I'm the worst person, and this is the only thing that's happened to me. Whereas when you say that, sometimes you'll share things that you think might be embarrassing or like really particular to you, and then you'll get a laugh of recognition, and that does make you feel a bit better because you're like, oh yeah, of course. Like there's nothing in the human experience that is just you. Like it's people have been alive for fucking ever. It can't be that in 2024 Hannah Platt is the first person to ever think this thought ever, you know? So I think it does, like, it is a bit grounding, and also it does make you feel a lot better that you're like, oh no, like I'm not alone. People have thought this weird thing before. Yeah. And also there is a fun element as well of being like, I feel this particular way, and then being able to express it in a succinct way where people also understand it, rather than being like, oh, and I feel like shit, and I just feel like this, and like, oh. Whereas when you're like, this is what body dysmorphia feels like in the moment. This is what my experience of it is like. Here it is for you, person who's never experienced it. To then have them go, I understand now. That like, that does help, you know? Yeah.
Hannah, how can we find out about you and where we can come and see you perform?
I've got Instagram. I hate all of this stuff, Mark. Like, got Instagram and Twitter. It's Hannah the Platt. My show, like my first solo show, that I'm doing at the Fringe is called Defense Mechanism, and it's on every day from the 31st of July at 8:10 at Pleasance Courtyard, Bunker 2. the second best bunker. Not even, it's a bunker. I'm in a bunker, Mark. I'm in a bunker, right? And not even the best bunker, the second best bunker, right? I feel like that sums me up as an act. I'm not even in the best shit place. I'm in the shittest second place. But yeah, that's like the main thing. I've got work in progresses and I always post about them on Instagram. Yeah. But obviously, please come to my friend's show.
And of course, my final question I ask everyone, in line with the title of the show, how would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
Oh, that's a big question, as you know.
That's why I give you a very short time to answer.
I know, yeah, right at the moment. Yeah, you sent me a list of things that you might cover, and you weren't like, and I'm going to ask you a really important, succinct question right at the end.
It's there. It's in the email.
I think, especially like, I guess the comedy I really enjoy would be someone expressing themselves as an individual with comedy as like a vehicle for expressing their opinion and their outlook on the world. Is that wanky?
Anna, thank you so much. I've loved this. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.